Have you ever wondered how some of your favorite artists were discovered and got their start? Well, if you have, then you're going to want to check out our featured interview with the man who discovered Bruno Mars, songwriter, producer Steve Lindsey. We discuss the unique trajectory Bruno's career had as a songwriter, as well as his advice to songwriters starting out, and much, much more. Coming up. This episode of the MUBUTV Insider video series is brought to you by the Music Business Registry. The Music Business Registry is the leading music industry publisher of the most up-to-date contact information for major and independent record label A&R, music publishers, artist managers, music attorneys, music supervisors, and much, much more. The Music Business Registry is the trusted industry standard and source serving the music business community for over 30 years with the most accurate and up-to-date contact information available. Their titles include the A&R Registry, the Film and Television Music Guide, the Music Publisher Registry, and the Music Attorney Registry. All of their publications are available in PDF, CSV, or online subscription. Visit musicregistry.com and use coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout. That's musicregistry.com, coupon code MUBUTV10. When you're ready to put your music to work, musicregistry.com. We're back at Sync Summit live from the second day, and we managed to catch up with musician, songwriter, and producer extraordinaire Steve Lindsey. Steve, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. You began your career a long time ago, I believe, as a musician.
Yes.
And that was prior to becoming a writer and a producer. Can you talk about how you started in the business?
Well, I was a classically trained pianist, and I did the normal hustle everybody would do, trying to get into sessions, and I got a job at one point with Lance Freed when he was at Irving Alamo producing demos. Mm-hmm. And I was going to a little studio and producing these demos, and he was giving me $600 a song, but I was so determined to make them great, I was actually spending $2,000, and it was costing me like $1,400 a song to do this. God. So I decided, I had this garage in Venice, I decided to soundproof it. I figured if I put a little studio in there, put a tape machine and a board, I could work as much as I wanted on these demos for $600 and maybe make some money. So that's what I did, and I started, I believe, the first home studio in Southern California in 1983. And I started working out of there, and then at one point, I was still trying to hustle up the work as a player, and I was getting a little bit here and there. Jeff Lorber was turning me on to a few gigs, but I wasn't getting where I wanted to be. So I decided I figured the power of the business is in the song, and who holds that? The songwriters. So I decided to go to all the top songwriters and say, you can have free time in my studio as long as I get to produce your demo. Now, not everybody took me up on it, but some pretty great people did. Allie Willis, Brenda Russell, mm-hmm. And I became friends with them, and I started making demos, and producers were hearing the demos and going like, I'd like the record to send, when they get the cut, they'd go like, hey, I want that recreated. And before I knew it, within a year, I became a very hot session player, and I was working for Russell Titleman and Richard Perry and, Giorgio. I mean, I was, all over town, and it took that entrepreneurial first step, to get to the next thing. Were they interested in you as a player and as an arranger? Mainly as an arranger, okay, yeah. Because I was playing around with technology. You got to realize, 83 was before MIDI,
right?
And sampling was just starting to play around with things. So I was pushing envelopes and in weird directions. I'd stay up all night sampling weird stuff and then like creating things that you couldn't just buy patches or anything. Like it's before the days of like, I bought everything in the world at Guitar Center for $39. So you had to make your own stuff. And I would just constantly make my own drum sounds, my own keyboard sounds, and then, eventually got into, becoming an arranger. And then Richard Perry offered me a full-time position, which I took.
At Planet?
He had Planet. It was probably towards the end of Planet, but he was still doing a lot of production work. And, that was probably the best move I ever made because he taught me everything I needed to know. I mean,
Richard's a great producer, and he knew songs very well.
I mean, I was actually producing at Warner Brothers for Seymour Stein when Richard offered me that, and I thought I was the hottest guy in town because I was doing, Seymour was hiring me. I was doing all these kooky bands in my studio, and I thought I was the guy. And then Richard hired me to go do this song called Dinner with Gershwin with Donna Summer. And I really didn't want to do it. I thought, I don't need to work with this old guy. I'm the hot guy. And I'll tell you something. That first night, I'll never forget it. I never forget driving home that day down Melrose. It was the worst night of my life because I realized, as a producer, I was a complete imposter watching him work.
Really? So you got it just on one day?
One day I saw him produce a vocal. I said, I can't do that.
Interesting.
I watched him work with Brenda Russell, the songwriter, and I said, I wouldn't know how to do that. And then he pushed me personally to a level that I didn't think I could get to. So that was 3 amazing things in one night, and I would die to work with him again. And then after I did several other times, he offered me a full-time position. And
so you got to work with him?
I got to work with him for 6 years.
Yeah, that must have been a great education as far as production.
It was the ultimate education. And it allowed me to, as a producer, because I left Ritch to produce Leonard Cohen to do the Future album. Mm-hmm. And then I did Aaron Neville's The Grand Tour, and then I worked with Celine, and I worked with, a lot of different people. But it allowed me to be able to be comfortable in any kind of horrible situation possible by watching Richard handle horrible situations, because, we're dealing with stars and temperamental people, and they should be temperamental because they're emotional, and that's what we love about them.
Right.
So
that's what makes their part of their talent great.
So, sometimes things can go left, and there was a situation with Elton John and Leonard Cohen where we're doing Born to Lose at Capitol Records with a 70-piece orchestra, where Leonard was saying, hey man, he did the first verse, he's going I'm not feeling it. And I'm going well, let's just keep rehearsing it. And he came out of the vocal booth and he said I don't know if this was such a good idea after all. And I said, well, come on, Leonard. And he goes, oh, don't worry about it, man. We're just 2 specks of dust in the whole scheme of things. And that's when I knew he was going to walk, when he did the 2 specks of dust thing.
Yeah. So,
it was because of the training with Richard, I was able to sit down with Leonard and say, listen, what's the problem? And he said, I'm just not, I thought it would be more like Hank Williams and Ray Charles. And I gave the orchestra a 10, right there, an early 10. I mean, half an hour before this, and I kept the rhythm section, rewrote the whole chart right then and there with the rhythm section.
Okay.
And then brought Leonard back in. He loved it. And then when we got to letter B, which the orchestra was going to be in anyway, which was Elton's part, I just said okay, just cut to letter B. Everybody inked on letter B. And it happened to work out. And Don Was thought it was the most brilliant arrangement, but it was this hodgepodge, just saving my ass arrangement.
Right, in the moment.
But that's what Richard, having that experience with Richard, I learned a lot about becoming a very good producer and being a really good servant to the artist. That was the main thing.
Now, it's interesting you say that because, a lot of record production is ultimately about serving the artist. And speaking of artists, you're the man credited with, discovering and nurturing Bruno Mars for, I believe it was 5 years before he got signed.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you found him and what that process was like in developing him?
Okay. Well, in the mid-'90s, after my record production career tanked because music changes.
Right.
And all of a sudden grunge was in. Mm-hmm. And the kind of producer I was, nobody wanted. The big high-priced, pop.
Pop, yeah.
Over. And so I went back and I developed a band called Guster out of Boston. I taught them songwriting in a basement, cut a record called Goldfly. And that kind of put me back on the map. But my manager at the time said, hey, you know what, if you're going to teach people songwriting, you should become a publisher. So, long story short, I got a JV with Windswept. I signed a kid named Mike Elizondo on a whim. He hadn't done anything. I just liked him. He was a bass player.
Right.
No songs. They thought I was crazy. But a week later, Dre called him. After I signed him, a week later, and I know, there I was. In the middle of a world that
You had no
I had no reason to be in.
Right.
But
okay.
I gravitated. I did what I had to do, and I became Dre's piano teacher during that time.
Okay.
He and I became close. Mike Lynn and I became close, and I was building my publishing company, and it was going great because here first year out, I'm Mike Elisano is just hitting him out of the ballpark.
Right, working with top people.
Well, he's mainly Dre.
Right, yeah.
And Eminem and Mary J. Blige and that whole thing. I mean, it's like, it was just a stroke of luck, but I ran with it and I got in there. And one day, Mike Lynn said to me, why don't you go down to this studio and see this kid, this kid named Bruno, and this, I forgot, it might have been in South Central, I don't remember where the studio was. Mm-hmm. And I went down there and I checked him out, and there was another kid, and they were working together. And I came back, and I was listening to what they were doing. I said to the studio owner, I said, who's writing all that stuff? He says, the other kid. I said, that Bruno kid is not singing those backgrounds, because those backgrounds are stacked so beautifully. I mean, that's not his voice. He said, no, that's the other kid. So I came back, I said, hey, I don't know about this Bruno kid, but there's another kid down there that is a monster. I said, that's who I want. And unfortunately, after I'd been courting the other kid, he had a manager that was not going to let him make any kind of deal. It was, basically in the streets kind of management at that point. And, I was told to, Mike and Dre said, you better step away. And that happened to be Neo.
That was his producer?
No, Neo was the other kid.
Oh, was the other kid? Okay.
So,
all right.
I was crying about that because I was going, that kid is going to be amazing.
That. Right.
So I ended up signing Bruno, and he wasn't really ready at that point. I mean, Mike got him immediately a deal with Sylvia Rohn at Motown. But I'll tell you something. Here's what I believe, and here's what I always look for, is someone who has a creative purpose. I can teach people process. Mm-hmm. That's easy. But they have to have a purpose before the process. So Bruno had a purpose. And his purpose was, he said to me, this is why he didn't like the deal at Motown. And this is why we had to get him out of there. Because they wanted to make him more like Neo. He said to me, I want to have real musicians. I want to have a real live band. I want to do old school like R&B. I want to put on a show like James Brown. And at that point in time, man, you saying that stuff, that was like retro. Nobody wanted that. Everybody wanted the future. They didn't want the past. And so I said, listen, man, you got to have a phrase. We talked about songwriting. We talked about the phrase that pays. We talked about a lot of stuff. But I also said, if you're going to do that, your lyrics have to be so current. Because otherwise, you're just going to be a retro act. And we might as well just listen to, James Brown. And we might as well just listen to Sam and Dave and all this other stuff. Because those are the records of that time period that are the best.
So, Steve, what was the process at that point?
Well, it was mainly teaching him the basics of songwriting.
Okay.
And, getting him in with different collaborators and finding the right collaborators. And at one point, I got very lucky again because some other friends brought in a kid named Brody Brown. He was 17 years old. He comes in with a little backpack on. His mother drove him to the studio. And I walked down the hall. And at this point, I was out of the Windswept deal. I met a guy through T-Bone Burnett who I just thought could be a great partner. And it was the most unobvious guy in the world because he had an alt country label.
Right.
And it was Cameron Strang. And we started this company, and I Cameron is just the greatest because this was so not in his his thing, but he went with it. And so we had this little company, and I walked down the hall to Cameron. I said, "There's a genius in the studio, this little 17-year-old." I said, "We got to sign him." He said, "Yeah, go ahead, sign him." I mean, that's how great Cameron was. There was we just did things. We didn't think, we just did it. And I put Brody and Bruno together, and that's when it started happening. Okay. That's when everything started gelling. And then Bruno brought Phil Lawrence into the situation, and they were all in that studio, and they were all working it out in that place. And it was just, sometimes when you get the right band, the right group of people, the energy becomes you can't contain it. It's going to work.
Now I understand if memory serves me right, Bruno Mars had hits prior to releasing his own record. Is that correct?
Yeah. And that's what happened was he had one song. Well, the first song he had, Menudo wanted to do.
Okay.
The label Epic wanted Menudo to do it. And Bruno and I had a knockdown, drag-out fight about him going to produce the song and giving up the song. Now, Bruno didn't have a record deal at this point. And man, I was just telling him, you got to get in this game, man. And he goes, I'm saving this song for my record. I said, well, this is the only song you're going to write. You got a problem. And fortunately, the next day, Cara DiGuardia was in my studio, and I came up to Cara. I said, hey, Bruno can get a cut with Menudo, and he wants to save it for a record he doesn't even have. And she said, get in the game, bitch. And he said, okay. So he listened to her, right. And we went down to Florida I flew down with him just to make sure he would be okay producing it, because I knew those guys couldn't sing, so I wanted to help him through it a little bit.
Okay.
But he did a fine job with it, and that's when he met his manager at the time, who was his A&R guy, and it just kind of all started gelling. And then he started, he had that track for Nothing on You, and instead of pulling his voice off of it, they kept it for B.O.B. And so he was, hey, it's not abnormal for a great artist-songwriter to start by having hits for other people, because,
Absolutely.
Look at the people who've had it before, like Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell,
right.
Neil Young. We can name, the greatest songwriters in the history of...
Carole King.
Yeah.
Yeah, it goes on and on.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
so there's nothing wrong, and actually that's a great place for someone to start.
It gives you total credibility.
Absolutely. So and then, I remember sitting with Mike Caron at an award show, and Bruno hadn't really made the record yet, but he was going to, and Mike said to me, he goes, you're Bruno kid? And I go, yeah. And he goes, we're going to take it all the way. And I go like, okay, sure, But
he meant it, yeah.
He meant it, and he did it, and, again, I found myself very lucky.
Let me ask you, how many of the songs that ended up on Bruno's debut album were songs that you had worked on?
Well, I didn't write anything, but I was, I feel like I coached him pretty well. And, but they wrote those songs.
Okay, so they had all been written before?
No, they were written in the studio. They were written in our room. And, I would come in time to time and stick my head and give my 2 cents. But I by the time they were writing those the final songs, he knew the process pretty well, and he knew what to do.
Okay.
Just the Way You Are came in after Cassius DeCobb wrote that song, and then they rewrote. They took the basis of it and they reworked it. But I think that was the last song to come in, and that was the only song really that was outside of the crew.
Okay. Let me ask you something. As I'm sitting here listening to you speak, it's funny because the whole arc of your career has been musician, writer, producer. And then you go on to work with, a lot of very successful artists, some who are giants in the writing field. Leonard Cohen, other than Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell, that's sort of the holy trinity of brilliant 20th century pop writing. It doesn't get better than that. And I'm curious, you've been on both sides of it as a writer who has had a publishing deal and did that, and then you've also been on the side of it as a music publisher. Mm-hmm. What's your advice to writers today who are beginning their careers, who are offered publishing deals, who may feel, well, I should hold on to my publishing, or should I, get with this publisher? What advice do you have, or what's your feelings on that subject?
Well, my standard advice is there's one reason not to make a publishing deal and 2 reasons to. The reason not to make a publishing deal is if you have a strong catalog that you're making, $1 million a year every year on your songs, and go get the best admin deal possible.
Administration.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go get someone to collect your money, and there's plenty of good people out there who do that, and find someone who's going to give you the best rate, and maybe pitch a little, but generally the admin people don't do that. you know. But if you have that strong catalog, there's no reason to sell your publishing. If the reason to make a publishing deal is the first reason is if you don't believe in yourself, and you just happened to like walk into a situation where maybe a friend said, "Hey, play a chord here, and we'll give you 10% of the song," or "Go out and get us some weed, and we'll and we'll give you 10% of the song."
Right.
And all of a sudden, that song becomes a major hit. The thing to do then is don't come to me, but go to Sony or Universal and make a huge publishing deal for not only that song but the next 10 of those. So get paid for 10 of those babies because you will never do that again. That's one reason to make a publishing deal. Okay. The other reason to make a publishing deal is if you do believe in yourself, but you're not making $1 million a year. Right. You're not making $200,000 a year. And you're probably not making $50,000 a year. And there's one person at one of these companies that you believe that can take you from where you are now to the next step. Meaning that if you need to be put in situations where someone really believes in you and says, "Look, I can put you in the room with this person and you're going to be great there if you're there, if that's where you're at right now." That's a good reason to make a publishing deal, for access into a world that you can't get into normally. Okay. Or, if there's someone, and the way I work is basically I train writers. So my thing is more like a school. So I'll take people, I've sold now about 100 million records, and I've never signed anybody whose name appeared on a record.
So never a recording artist writer.
Well, they're recording, but they've never had no record deals, no songs, no names on any records.
You always joined them before?
I've signed people always before. I recognize the talent very early on, and not in an embryonic stage, but probably, where I feel like they're at the 70% mark, and if they sit with me for a year, I can get them to the 100% mark, right. And then they work with me, and other mentors that I have in the company that are really good, way better than me. I have Jeff Barry and David Fairwald and Dylan O'Brien that help out with the writers, so it's almost they get a master class in our place.
Wow. And
by doing that, they come out as very strong writers that can endure any time period, because music changes. I fell into that pitfall too in the 90s, where all of a sudden my career was over. So I just look at it as like, hey, music is constantly changing. Whatever we're doing now, like if you're doing what is on the radio now, you're already dead.
Right.
You got to be thinking so outside of the box. That's the case with Bruno. Nobody wanted that stuff when we were doing it. Everyone was going like, retro? I don't think so. But we hit it right at the right time. And, the things I'm thinking about now have nothing to do with what's going on right now. I'm trying to think, 2 years, 3 years down the road.
Right.
And prepare for that.
And having faith that, your vision, like Bruno's vision, is going to pay off, even though everybody's saying, that's old school, nobody wants that.
Right.
But believing in yourself enough and staying on the path and having hits with other people, which really help bring a credibility.
Well, I think, for me, I'm lucky in that way. But the main thing is that I'm a fan. I was that kid in the record store at 10 years old, mowing the lawn, saving up my buck to buy the single every day. And I didn't have the buck, I was still in the record store, moping around and
scoping what you wanted to buy.
And I was listening. I was such a huge fan. But I also had that thing where I would get into something so long, and then my appetite for it would be, it would just be too much, and I'd want something else. And whatever I wanted happened to be the next phase. So I felt like I was always a good barometer of what would be happening next.
Okay.
And I just follow that. That's what I follow in my life. Like when I get sick of something, I go like, what do I want now? And that's what I'm going to work on. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Hey, it's a numbers game.
Yeah.
But I believe if you always do the greatest work possible, if you're always, going the distance and rewriting and trying to achieve the best thing possible, it's never a waste of time, because it only gets you better every time you do that. So you might not make it on this record, but you know what? If you continue to do that, you will make it. It might not be every time out, but I believe you've got to go every time out with, the pursuit of excellence.
Absolutely.
And that's how I run the company. I try to instill that with everybody. I'm a very tough taskmaster. I know that as I leave the room in my writers' rooms, I know everybody's going like that to me, but I want them to because they got to get that out of their system.
Sure.
Like fuck Lindsey, and it's like what a dick. But because I'm constantly rewriting, and sometimes they'll have a first draft, and I'll make them rewrite it 90 times or whatever, and then I'll come back to first draft and go, hey, that was pretty good. I mean, I'm sorry I made you do that. And go on.
Right.
But the thing is, and I'd like to share this with you, is that what's really interesting if you keep this in mind? If all of a sudden there was no music, if there was nothing, like right now, today, there's no music, like mothers couldn't sing their children to sleep. I'm talking no music, like it doesn't exist at all. How long do you think it would take before mankind starts going mad? I would say about 90 days. How long do you think before we'd all start killing each other? I'd say about a year. Okay, truly, because without music, life is just miserable. I mean, all you'd hear is clanging outside and people yelling at each other, and I mean, it would be maddening. So if you keep that in mind, music's a really important job.
Plays an important part in our lives.
It is so important. And it's as important as growing great food for people. So I really look at it as like, I'm never going to do the shitty, I'm not saying any music shitty, but I'm never going to do like the minimal amount. I'm always going to do the great work, even if it takes me longer. Because it's that important. I take the job, it's like, I feel honored to be able to do it or to inspire people to do it.
Absolutely.
So that's how I work.
Fascinating stuff coming from a leading songwriter and record producer who has worked with some of the top recording artists in the music business. So, insiders, question of the day. What were some of the most educational aspects of our conversation with Steve? Was it the process of working with and developing Bruno Mars? Or was it the unique trajectory that Bruno Mars's career had as a songwriter prior to his launch as a recording artist? Or was it his advice to beginning songwriters? Or maybe it was something else that connected with you. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching this video. Make sure to subscribe to MUBUTV for more information on how to educate, empower, and engage your music career. You can also check out a summary of this episode and everything we talked about in the description below as well. And if you enjoyed this video, we'd love it if you hit the like button and let us know what other kinds of videos and types of content that you want to see on our channel. Hit us up in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video.